Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 103rd Landon Lecture on Public Issues. This lecture series was founded in 1966 and honors former Governor Alf Landon. The Governor of Kansas from 1932 to 1936 and the Republican candidate for president in 1936 against Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Alf Landon was a nationally prominent Republican and an advisor to many presidents in the post-World War II era. This lecture series at K-State is a tribute to his contribution to the politics of Kansas and the United States of America. We are extremely pleased to have as our guest tonight the Attorney General of the United States, Janet Reno. Before I introduce our speaker, let me introduce other members of the platform party. On my left is Brad Finkeldye, Vice President of the K-State Student Body and Interim President during the illness of Student Body President Jeff Peterson. Brad is a senior in chemical engineering from Wichita, Kansas. Next to him is Professor John Haviland, the president of the Kansas State University Faculty Senate. Dr. Haviland is a professor of agronomy. On my right is Dr. Charles Reagan, chairman of the Landon Lecture Series and my executive assistant. Edward Seaton, owner and publisher of the Manhattan Mercury and chairman of the Landon Patrons, was unable to be here tonight because of foreign travel. Janet Reno was sworn in as the nation's 78th Attorney General by President Clinton on March 12, 1993. She is the first woman to serve in this office. From 1978 until the time of her appointment, Ms. Reno served as the state attorney for Dade County, Florida. She was initially appointed to this position by the governor of Florida and was subsequently elected to that office 5 times. Before her public service as state attorney for Dade County, Ms. Reno was a partner in the Miami law firm of Steele, Hector, and Davis. Ms. Reno received a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Cornell University and her Bachelor of Laws from Harvard Law School in 1963. Shortly after being sworn in as Attorney General of the United States, Ms. Reno immediately faced a significant challenge in the Branch Davidian incident at Waco, Texas. Then she was confronted with the Ruby Ridge incident, which ultimately has led to a reorganization of the top management of the FBI. Most recently, agents and agencies reporting to her have been directly involved in the investigation of the Oklahoma City bombing. The Office of the Attorney General and the whole Department of Justice are at the very center of the important debates over criminal and social justice in America today. We are very fortunate to have an outstanding person of Janet Reno's caliber and integrity in this office today. She has the experience, the ability, and the commitment to excellence to lead the Justice Department to confront these challenges and to instill confidence in the American judicial system. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and a pleasure for me to welcome to Kansas State University and to the Landon Lecture Podium the Attorney General of the United States, Janet Reno.
Thank you so much for your warm welcome. I appreciate all the efforts of all the organizers that made it possible for me to be here tonight, for it is a great privilege and a very great honor for me to deliver the 103rd Alfred M. Landon Lecture on Public Issues. It is a special honor because although a Democrat, Governor Landon represents to me what public service is all about, both as governor and as advisor. And I think it is fitting that this important lecture series, with its focus on public issues, stands as a lasting tribute to him and to his legacy and example of public service. Part of that legacy is very special to me because Senator Nancy Landon Kassenbaum has been a wonderful mentor for me in Washington. She's an example for me of what public service should be about: thoughtful, actions based on common sense, a sensitive bipartisanship, and you should be very proud that she represents this state so gallantly and so excellently. This is a time of great challenge and great opportunity in the life of this nation. I see Americans rising to the challenge wherever I go. I see young people committed to public service. I have met wonderful public officials. I have seen caring Americans of all races and ethnic backgrounds working in their communities for the good of the people. But I also, in these 2.5 years that I've served as Attorney General, seen too many Americans isolated and alone, separate and apart from each other. It may be a 3-year-old walking unsupervised across a housing development, an elderly person afraid to come out from behind their door because of the violence on her streets. Rich separated from poor as more Americans become poorer. The professions too often isolated in their narrow disciplines, afraid to link with each other to solve the problems of the world. Gated communities too often keep us apart. While much has been done in this society to address injustices based on racial and ethnic backgrounds, have historically been the vehicles through which we have worked cooperatively to build communities. Thus, we find ourselves at a critical junction. Do we go it alone, by ourselves, each in our own way? Some may say it's an example of America's tradition of rugged individualism. But the history of this great nation teaches us to the contrary. If we look at our history, if we look at our experience, it teaches us why we must come together. Our experience teaches us the value of community. In the 19th century, the keen observer of American society, the Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville, wrote with great admiration of the American tendency to reach beyond family, to find linkages with the broader community, to form a strong civic culture. The history of this great state teaches a similar lesson. At the heart of the bold, individual, pioneer spirit that developed the vast and beautiful Kansas landscape, one I saw tonight as I came in with a magnificent sunset. At the heart of all of that were a series of communities. Communities of people who boldly set themselves upon the historic Chisholm or Santa Fe Trail, or upon one of the many other historic pathways that cross this state to find better lives for their families. Yes, these were communities of caring people who were never too busy to help their neighbor with a barn raising or a community harvest. These were communities of people who provided the underlying support upon which the pioneering efforts were built. This land was settled by brave souls, but not by souls in isolation. I have seen another example, a stark and dark one for me initially. For on August the 24th, 1992, in Miami at 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard the winds of Hurricane Andrew begin to howl. For 4 hours, it wreaked a devastation across the land. As we came out in the dawn, we saw a world split apart and turned upside down. As we talked to people, as we walked around, in those days that followed, we saw a fear, an isolation, an aloneness. We saw the results of isolation. We saw those brief hours when physical forces had broken the bonds of community. But then I watched that American spirit come forward. I watched people come together. I watched police working with citizens as they worked 36 hours without stopping. I watched black and white together stand in intersections, directing traffic just of their own volition. I saw the elderly come out from behind doors to mind children of neighbors so that they could help to clean up and to get food for all. I saw the community's most prominent citizens working side by side to help restore housing projects. And I saw not only the people of that community respond, I saw this nation respond with supplies, with help, with people who drove hundreds of miles to help, to be involved, to be counted. Countless brave souls overcame Hurricane Andrew, but they were not souls in isolation. And then more recently, on April the 19th, 1995, I saw the tragedy of Oklahoma City. On that Sunday that followed, I came to Oklahoma City for the memorial service, and I watched a strength of community that I will never, ever forget. I watched people come together to speak out against the violence that had spawned that blast, to reach out to victims and to their survivors and to help them begin to heal, to reach out to help and to support law enforcement, and to stand up and to defend this nation we love. We have seen what America can do when it comes together. And now, as we stand on the cusp of a new century, communities with their backs to the wall and a range of problems staring them in the face are building partnerships, engaging citizens, and moving forward to deal with the issues and the challenges they face. But as we do so, we must confront together a crisis in this nation, a crisis of isolation, the isolation of our young people, the youth violence that it spawns. Youth violence, probably one of the greatest single crime problems in America today. We must confront the fact that according to a recent Carnegie Corporation report, young adolescents from all economic strata often find themselves alone in communities where there are few adults and no safe place to go. Ladies and gentlemen, a close look at the nation's young people discloses something that is very alarming. Since 1985, we have seen an increase in the level of youth violence that is simply staggering, particularly for youth aged 14 to 17. The tragedy of this youth violence produces similarly tragic corollary: youth as the victims of that violence. This surge in youth violence is particularly frightening when we realize that it occurred, for the most part, in a period when the number of young people in the category of age 14 to 17 was decreasing in the United States. The distressing story that we must confront is that as the number of young people in this age category was falling, the percentage of those youth committing homicide was rising steeply. The nation's demographic data make quite clear that the next 20 years will produce a significant increase in the number of young people 14 to 17. Unmistakably, then, the current of rise in youth violence presages the next generation of even more tragic crime and violence, unless we do something now. The Carnegie Corporation's new report, Preparing Adolescents for a New Century, describes the more general situation in which our young people find themselves. As it says, across America today, adolescents are confronting pressures to use alcohol, cigarettes, or other drugs, and to have sex at earlier ages. Many are depressed. About a third of adolescents report that they have contemplated suicide. Others are growing up lacking the competence to handle interpersonal conflict without resorting to violence. By age 17, about a quarter of all adolescents have engaged in behaviors that are harmful or dangerous to themselves and others: getting pregnant, using drugs, taking part in antisocial activity, and failing in school. Altogether, nearly half of Americans' adolescents are at high or moderate risk of seriously damaging their life chances. The damage may be near term, and vivid, or it may be delayed, like a time bomb set in youth. In this situation, exacerbated by the erosion of neighborhood networks and other traditional social support systems, children now spend significantly less time, the report goes on to say, in the company of adults than a few years ago. More of their time is spent in front of the television set or with their peers in age-segregated, unsupervised environment. Noting, the report said, that such conditions are especially severe in neighborhoods of poverty, it stressed, however, that such conditions occur among families of all income levels and backgrounds, and in cities, suburbs, and rural areas. Wherever we go in America, too many of our youth are afraid, alone, and angry. Where do we begin? It is time to come together, to reach out and reweave the fabric of society and community around our youth. As our forefathers went west together, as they raised barns together, as we came through the tragedy of Oklahoma City together, let us come together to build a future for our youth and to speak out against the violence and the isolation that too often surround them. Each of us has a role to play: the businessman, the doctor, the police officer, the homemaker, the local and federal governments, the local civic association, the church, the elderly volunteer. I will always remember a man I met at a community meeting in Miami who stood up and said, "Do you know how old I am and what I do 3 days a week?" He explained he was 84 years old and that for 3 mornings a week, 3 hours each day, he volunteered as a teacher's aide for a first-grade teacher. A young woman was seated next to him, and she stood up and said she was the first-grade teacher. And the children who had learning disabilities in her class could not wait for their time with this gentleman because he had the patience of Job and gave them such wonderful opportunities. And the gifted children could not wait to meet with him because he enabled them to travel beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars through his imagination. It doesn't make any difference how old we are or where we come from. We can all touch the lives of our children and give them a sense of community. But we must start early. We cannot wait till the child is in trouble. It is often too late by then. But there are real things that we can do to make a difference in the lives of our children. We can support community policing, programs where police involve themselves with the neighbors they serve in identifying the problems and identifying the priorities of that community or that neighborhood. Police officers working with the community to build trust, not to build suspicion, not to create isolation. Police officers working with young people in the community to provide support and to be mentors. Community policing is a powerful tool. Throughout the country, we have heard stories of how it has been working in these last years. In Lowell, Massachusetts, where for the first time in 25 years they had a year pass without a single homicide, community policing has brought renewed peace of mind and safety to residents. That is the power of the community policing, and that power is being unleashed as we move forward in the Justice Department in this year to put 25,000 community police officers on the streets of this nation where they count. For as we work together, we must reach out and hold our young people accountable when they do wrong. We must love them enough not to give up on them, but to work with them and to let them know that there will be fair, firm, certain punishment when they hurt others, when they lash out. But we must also let them know that with the punishment comes aftercare and support as they return to the community. Otherwise, they will become part of a revolving door. We can do so much through community-based after-school and evening programs, for youth can make a real contribution to reducing crime and violence amongst our young people if they can be involved in efforts and if we give them positive programs to participate in. Statistical data tells us that the offending rate for young people rises dramatically after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the kids are generally released from school. The Carnegie Council on Adolescent Development concluded that communities should provide more attractive, safe, growth-promoting settings for young adolescents during the out-of-school hours, times of high risk, when parents are often not available to supervise their children. In this country, there are more than 17,000 national and local youth organizations, including those sponsored by religious groups, but they do not adequately provide support or provide opportunities for about 1/3 of young people who most need their support and guidance. These organizations must now work, said the report, to expand their reach, enlisting the help of community residents, families, schools, volunteers, and adolescents themselves in offering more activities that convey information about life, careers, and places beyond the neighborhood, as well as to engage them in public service and other constructive services. Communities must play the lead role in creating and supporting these efforts, but there is an important federal support role as well. One of the things that pleased me most about the 1994 Crime Act was that it provided monies to fund these kinds of programs in communities around the country. The federal government needs to support local community initiatives, and the Crime Act has pointed us in that direction. Thirdly, through mentoring efforts, we can now make a meaningful connection with a young person. The Department of Justice is supporting efforts around the country that seek to connect caring, committed adults to young people who need that positive connection to help direct their lives in a positive way. But the private sector has also played a key role in sponsoring mentoring programs. One program that has produced impressive results that demonstrates the potential of mentoring is the Quantum Opportunities Program. Funded by the Ford Foundation, Quantum has had a real impact on youth in Philadelphia, Saginaw, Michigan, and Oklahoma City. Through this program, mentors provide sustained support, guidance, and real assistance to high school students over a 4-year period. Students were required to participate in a range of activities, including academic-related activities, outside of school hours, and community service projects. The program results have been impressive. 63% of the participants graduated from high school. 42% are currently enrolled in college. That's compared to 42% and 16% respectively for those not involved in the Quantum program. Mentoring can make a difference. 2 years ago, I went to a detention facility in Omaha, Nebraska. I always try to ask young people who've been in trouble or who are in trouble, what could have been done to prevent the problem in the first place? And the answer is always the same, but it was most vivid that afternoon. The young man in detention said, "I just wished I'd had somebody to talk to, somebody who understands how hard it is to grow up, somebody who could give me a pat on the back when I needed it, but chew me out when I needed that too." Each of us can make a difference. Fourthly, we must do all we can as communities to ensure that our children get the education they need to be competitive in the 21st century. I remember my elementary school. I remember the names of all my teachers, and they were so important in my life. We have got to let this nation know how important our teachers are. We have got to make being a teacher as important as being a lawyer. We have got to do something about the fact that this nation pays its football players in the 6-digit figures and pays its teachers what we pay them, and we've got to correct that if we are to make a difference. But we must also focus on a new part of education. For so long, there was a parent at home with small children, but now either single parents or both parents are working. And we must make sure that we provide not just child care, but educare for those terribly formative years in a child's life. As a prosecutor in Dade County, I was required to figure out what to do about crack-involved infants and their mothers, whether to prosecute the mother, to pursue dependency proceedings for the child. And the doctors took me to our large public hospital, to the neonatal unit, to observe these children. At that point, the epidemic was cresting. The community had not been prepared, and there were babies in the bassinets who had not been changed, talked to, or held except when changed and fed. And they weren't really responding, whereas children with severe defects born at birth, with birth defects, were across the room beginning to respond through their pain with human emotion. Those ages of 0 to 3 are so critical, and as we consider education, we must consider educare in its finest sense. If we can teach people to spell, if we can teach our children how to do arithmetic, we can teach them how to resolve conflicts without knives and guns and fists. We, through the great power of our teachers, can teach them how to appreciate the differences in each, to appreciate the differences in races and ethnic background if we start early. We must use our schools to prepare our young people for work. Our whole School to Work program can make such a difference, and I've often wondered why we have high school graduation requirements that did not include or do not include a requirement that we graduate with a skill that can enable us to earn a living wage. Somebody said, "Well, but I'm going to college." But how many people have you met that have a BA in English Lit that are sitting around trying to figure out what they're going to do because they don't have a skill till they go to graduate school? We can do so much if we work together. If we develop a partnership with the business community and local educational facilities. if we teach our children the international dimensions of this world and the global consequences of all that we do. We must keep our kids in school. The connection between truancy and subsequent offending is powerful. Through a joint effort with the Department of Education, we have produced an initiative to help communities deal more effectively with the problem of children who are falling out of the mainstream of our educational system. But this is an area where local community-based leadership will be crucial. This nation has made great strides in dealing with the problem of illegal drug use since the 80s, but there is still more to be done. We are having great success on the front in Cali and against the Cali cartels. We are making inroads against drug-related violence in our communities, but there is still much to be done, particularly when we recognize that drugs are still prevalent amongst our young. We must renew our efforts to educate our children about drugs and to reaffirm prevention efforts that have proven successful across this country. I don't know what you call my equivalent of the Red Ribbon Council, but in terms of the Miami Coalition, in terms of community people coming together from all walks of life, they can be so effective in terms of the development of prevention programs. And finally, we must give our young people an opportunity to serve. They want so to be somebody. They want so to make a contribution and to feel like they've helped other people. And we see young people taking up the President's challenge to engage in national service through AmeriCorps. These young people are responding powerfully and positively to the President's call to give something back to their country and to their communities. I am proud that many of these AmeriCorps service workers are working with the Department of Justice to enhance public safety and to build strong communities in some of our Operation Weed and Seed neighborhoods around the country. Others are working to ensure that children are immunized, while other national service workers are building and renovating homes for poor families. I am heartened when I see that kind of response to a call for service, and I think this nation needs to continue to find ways to encourage that spirit. But communities cannot succeed by themselves, because to give our adolescents a chance, we must give them a strong foundation, and early childhood is so vitally important, as I learned in that visit to the neonatal unit. What those child development experts taught me was that 50% of all learned human response is learned in the first year of life. During the first 3 years of life, the child develops the concept of reward and punishment and develops a conscience. There is no substitute during that period of life for a strong and caring family. Raising children is the single most difficult thing I know to do. About 10 years ago, a friend died, leaving me as the legal guardian of her 15-year-old twins, a boy and a girl. The girl was in love, and I've learned an awful lot about raising children in the last 10 years. It takes hard work, love, intelligence, and an awful lot of luck, but there is nothing as rewarding. I will never forget putting that young lady on the plane and then going to see her graduate in 3 years cum laude. And on each occasion, she threw her arms around my neck and said, "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." Being Attorney General has been a great honor, but nothing can compare with what you can do if you reach out to children. This administration has taken steps to recognize that there are caring, wonderful families in this nation that need just a little bit of support to reinforce what they are doing with their children. The administration has led the way to expand earned income tax credit, which is crucial for working families who are working hard and doing all they can to give their children a full range of opportunities. We must continue to support the earned income tax credit which enjoys a long history of bipartisan support. President Reagan once called it the best anti-poverty, the best pro-family, the best job creation measure to come out of Congress. We have led the way in the enactment of the Family and Medical Leave Act, which supports families by giving working people the opportunity to be with their loved ones during crucial times in the life of a family. And we have focused on domestic and family violence. When I first served as a prosecutor in 1978 in Miami, judges and police officers would look at me and say, "But that's just a domestic." But we did a study with the medical examiner in Dade County and found that 40% of the homicides in the county during the previous 20 years were related to domestic violence: husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, ex-spouses. It's not too much different now. About 2 years ago, I participated in a fiber optic hookup in Iowa with 15 cities or towns. They had met for about an hour before to establish their priorities, police chiefs and other community leaders. And in approximately 8 of the 15 cities or towns, domestic violence was at the top. Why is it so important? Because the child who watches his father beat his mother comes to accept violence as a way of life. And unless we start to intervene and tell the world that we will not tolerate this type of violence, we will see it handed down from one generation to another. But supporting families is not just something the government should do. All sectors of the American community need to lend a hand in providing this crucial support. I look at young parents today struggling to get breakfast on the table, the children dressed and off to school. They get home through rush hour. They get dinner on the table, the children bathe, the homework done, and everybody collapses in bed. They run errands on Saturday and go to church on Sunday and start to prepare for the next day on Sunday evening, and they don't have quality time with their children. I remember my afternoons after school and during the summer. My mother worked in the home. She taught us to play baseball, to appreciate Beethoven's symphonies. She taught us to play fair. She punished us. She loved us with all her heart. And there is no child care in the world that will ever be the substitute for what that lady was in our life. Somehow, if we can send a man to the moon, we ought to be able to develop workplaces which are far more family friendly. This is an area where technology can help to support our family and community building efforts with flex time, job sharing, telecommuting, and other workplace policies that allow working parents to become involved in their lives of their children. What so many principals will tell you is that they can't get parents to come to school. Let's start giving parental leave for just a little bit of school time. Many American businesses are taking the lead in this area and really making a difference for families around this country. Some of these companies are making flexible schedules available to parents and are finding that their rates of tardiness and absenteeism are reduced. Others are going even further, and in addition to providing job sharing, condensed work weeks, and telecommuting, they are offering informational videos and materials on childcare, parenting, and other concerns to help parents balance work and family demands. These efforts can make such a difference. So much of what we face seems so daunting. The problems seem so large. The homicide statistics so grim. I have no doubt that we can meet this challenge. For I remember looking at the devastation of the hurricane and wondering how we would rebuild. I remember looking up at the Murrow building and wondering how a city would cope. We know the answers. What does the future hold for our children? These are our most precious possession. These are our future. I think I know the answer. As a matter of fact, I'm sure I know the answer. Wherever I go in this nation, I see people starting to work together across social, economic, and racial divides in both traditional ways and new ways to address the problems they face in their local communities. It may seem daunting, but I see America accepting the challenge. I see America coming forward together unafraid. And I know that child by child, family by family, block by block, school by school, city by city, state by state, we will build the thriving and healthy communities across this great nation that all of us want for ourselves and for our families. Thank you. And goodbye.
Excellent. That was great. Excellent. Excellent. That was excellent. Thank you very much. We'll see if we can get the lights. See if we can get the lights out so we can look at the audience. Thank you very much, Attorney General Janet Reno, for that excellent presentation. Could we take those bright lights and turn them off? So we can see the audience here. So the Attorney General has agreed to answer some of your questions, and I think we have 4 microphones up there. As you can see, looking across the stage, looking across the seats, there are 4 microphones. So the Attorney General is more than willing to answer some of your questions. So if you could move down to the mic. It's 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think we have a question here at station number 2.
Okay, you talk about punishment and rewards and things like that. Well, I'm a bartender and I talk to a lot of people. And I talk to a lot of people that have been in jail and have been in prison and they're out and they're doing the same things again. And I look at them and I say, hey, why are you doing this again? And they say, hey man, because it ain't nothing but a thing. I can go back in, I get 3 squares a day, and I got it made in there. I got my friends in there, and I know what I'm doing in there, and I can get along. And they think it's cool. And you want to talk about these kids that are 13, 14, 15, 16 to 17, and they're raping each other, and they're shooting each other, and things like that, because the gangsta and all that other stuff is glorified and things like that, and they think it's cool to be this way. Why can't we be like Alabama and have a chain gang? You talk to these criminals that are out now, and you ask them about chain gangs and working hard in jail and not making jail fun, taking away their cable TV, and taking away all this other luxury stuff that they don't need. Because in my eyes, if you rape a 10-year-old girl, you just destroyed her life, and you don't deserve to have any comfort, buddy.
I have a better suggestion. I have a better suggestion than the chain gang for you. Because if you put them on the chain gang, they're going to be out at some point. And if they've been on a chain gang, they won't have learned skills that will enable them to be productive members of society when they come out. What I suggest and what I've been advocating instead of chain gangs are serious youthful offender facilities like boot camps that provide solid work opportunities, rigorous physical exertion, GED programs, job training and placement programs, and by the time they get to bed at night, they know they've been working. I happen to have visited programs like that, and they don't tell you that they like it that much. They complain, they moan, they groan. And when they get out, they're not permitted just to go back out to the streets and carry on. There's aftercare and follow-up, and they've got to get a job, and they've got to get a job on their own with support from other people. And the recidivism rate amongst those that go through programs like that, as opposed to those that just go to prison programs where they may do some work, is a lot less. So I think if we balance the ideas, we probably come up with a better solution.
You know, we have a question up here at station number 3.
Station 3?
Ms. Reno, first of all, I'd like to thank you for coming to Manhattan tonight. You're a great inspiration to many women, and it's really an honor to be in the room with you. My question is about welfare reform, something we're hearing about in the press quite a bit these days. It seems to me from your comments tonight about coming together as community that what we're seeing coming out of Washington in Congress these days regarding welfare reform would really be the antithesis of what you are describing, because if we're talking about community coming together, we certainly can't be talking about the rich continuing to make war upon the poor. And I'd like to know about your perspective on the current welfare reform debate.
Well, here's my perspective on welfare reform. As I worked with single mothers who lived on welfare, they would try their level best amongst the many that I knew working in the public housing development, where we were trying to institute crime reduction programs that proved successful because of these women's efforts. They would come in so frustrated and they'd say, Ms. Reno, I went to get a job and I held it for a certain period of time, and then I lost benefits that I had, and I was worse off than if I hadn't gone to work in the first place. Why can't you make it reasonable for me to go to work? And then she said, and I went and tried harder and got a little better job, and I lost some clinic benefits, and I was worse off than if I hadn't gone to work in the first place. And then I didn't have money for child care, so I'm home again. What do I do about it? I think we've got to design a welfare reform effort that values work, that provides an incentive for work, and yet at the same time provides for safe, constructive educare for those first 3 or 4 years, which are so vital to a child's development. People say, how are we going to afford some of this? I think we can afford it if we start making that investment early on and make the investment along the way. But those are my ideas, and I think hopefully we may be able to come out with something that approaches that.
We'll try number 4 up here. Go ahead.
Yes, could you give us an update on the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing?
As many of you who have seen some of my press availabilities know, I can't comment on any pending case except to say that we are pursuing every possible effort we can to ensure that the people accountable are brought to justice.
Okay, let's try this. There's a young man up here in station number 2. Okay, station number 2 up there.
You've told of many different times that you've seen Americans working together, but of all these times, which has been the greatest and the best that you have seen? If you had to point it down to one specific time, what would that be?
I think it's probably Oklahoma City. I think the spirit of the people of Oklahoma City that Sunday is a spirit that I will never, ever forget. I then saw it in other places. I was visiting in Indianapolis, and I saw firefighters that had left their homes and left their jobs to go to Oklahoma City to volunteer to assist. They were so touched by all the people there who had been so supportive and so grateful to them. I've talked with police officers in Washington, D.C. who volunteered their efforts. Some of the survivors of the victims in Oklahoma City have come to visit me in Washington. One, when I had been visiting in Oklahoma, gave me the picture of her little 1-year-old grandchild who had been killed. That picture sits on my desk as a reminder of all victims and of the courage and the bravery of the people of Oklahoma City.
Okay, let's microphone number 1.
I've read about Watergate, or Waco and Ruby Ridge and House Waco hearings. What is the government, as well as whatever law enforcement agencies and you, what are you guys doing to better the FBI or the government agencies that might be overusing their power?
What we tried to do, first of all, with Waco, Waco happened, the initial incident happened before I took office, and there was a change in leadership after Waco in the director of the FBI. Working with the new director, Louis Free, who I think has done a wonderful job, we've tried to make sure that the FBI has the capacity of both hostage rescue experts as well as behavioral experts and negotiation experts who will work together on a continuing basis as a team to be able to respond, to be able to take every possible step that they can to avoid the problem. Secondly, one of the reasons that we were limited was because the number of HRT personnel were limited and we could not exchange them so that they could maintain their state of readiness. We have expanded the HRT team. We have provided additional training. I didn't face Ruby Ridge. That also occurred before I took office. And we would have done both of those original incidents much differently. Based on the experiences that we've had, we try to respond immediately with senior people on the scene in immediate conversation with the director of the FBI, and we continue to train in every way we can to address these issues.
I've noticed that many of the public schools in the larger inner cities are mostly African American, and at the same time, most white Caucasian students are going to private schools. Can anything be done to integrate the private schools?
I'm not so sure. I would caution against such a generalization because I have seen marvelous public schools that are fully integrated in different parts of communities across this nation. I think what we must all do, and we must all be concerned with the prospect of education and making sure that our public schools are the best they possibly can be, that teachers have the time to properly challenge their children, that we reduce the paperwork that impedes their efforts to teach. Just think of what the public schools have had to do. I look back and I think with the up until the Industrial Revolution, in most families in the world, both parents were the teachers in the home. The father was the miller, the wheelwright, but he was around the children as they were growing up. With the Industrial Revolution, he went to the factory and then later to the office and downtown. And then after World War II and during World War II, we saw the second parent began to go to work ever more often. We saw the public schools assume extraordinary technological and educational challenge. There's probably been the greatest burst of human knowledge in these last 50 years of any time in all of human history. In the last 100 years, just think, man to the moon, the automobile, the electric light, penicillin, sulfur, lasers, computers, and the schools have had to try to keep up with that. They've also seen a breakdown in the American family, and too often I've seen the teacher have to deal with the child who comes to school in tears because of domestic dissension at home. So I think the schools have had an extraordinary challenge and burden placed on them. I have a deep and abiding regard for the teachers who day in and day out do an incredible job of meeting that challenge, and I think our goal should be to enhance the schools for all Americans in every way we possibly can.
We'll get two more questions here. I think we have time for two more questions, so let's go to microphone 2 and then to microphone 1, and that would be it.
Welcome to Kansas, Attorney General Reno. Thank you for coming. I'm a federal park ranger, and as you know, there have been several incidents of late, particularly in the western section of the country, where park rangers and land managers have been attacked, have been threatened with lives, have had their offices firebombed, and unfortunately sometimes with the aid and abetment of local officials who have some notion that federal rules and regulations cannot be enforced by these federal park rangers, that they have no enforcement capability and their actions are null and void. As the leading law enforcement official in the country, what are you doing to take care of this strange sense of justice?
First of all, with respect to the violence and to the threats, we have been working with the National Park Service, with the Bureau of Land Management, with the Department of Interior, the Department of Agriculture, to make sure that, and we have had a session in Washington and are reaching out to develop training opportunities and opportunities to discuss these issues so that we find out just what needs to be done to properly back up those who are on the front line. The FBI has been working with these agencies, and in any instance in which we have had evidence of violence, we have immediately responded, and it has resulted in certain charges being filed. In most of those instances, local law enforcement has been very supportive, but there is in the certain areas of the West what is called the county supremacy movement, where the county claims to have the ownership of the federal lands. And what we're doing in those situations where it doesn't involve violence yet is we are litigating in the courts to make sure that the Constitution is clear, and what we believe to be a very clear legal principle is spelled out for these people and then subsequently enforced.
It's a pleasure to have been here to hear you speak. I have two questions concerning the arena of social injustice. One is your response to the issue of powder cocaine and crack cocaine and the way that that is handled as far as punishment. And secondly, the other issue is that of white-collar crime and non-white-collar crime, and why come there's such a disparity between the punishment doles out in both areas. Thank you.
The first issue, for those not familiar with it, under a statute passed by Congress, there is a 100-to-1 ratio between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. And its impact is felt most significantly on the black community because crack cocaine has had the greatest impact in the black community. It was passed a couple of years ago, and when I first came to Washington, I was very surprised because as a local prosecutor, I had dealt with a statute that had the 1-to-1 ratio and there was no disparity. I had also seen what crack had done to many different neighborhoods, and it had had a disastrous impact. I attended hearings of the Sentencing Commission trying to figure out how we could deal with this apparent disparity. It became clear in testimony that I heard and that others heard that the marketing features and the immediate features of crack made it more dangerous, but I reached the conclusion that 100-to-1 was not a proper ratio. I asked prosecutors in our offices, in the U.S. Attorney's offices across the country, to review this issue and to give me their recommendations. One person that I counted on a great deal was Eric Holder, who had been a well-respected Superior Court judge in Washington, D.C., and is now the United States Attorney in Washington, D.C. He had had the opportunity to spend considerable amount of time in his neighborhoods, visiting with people, talking with them, and he came back to me with the other U.S. attorneys and said, again, we don't think the ratio should be 100-to-1, but there should be some disparity to reflect the damage that crack has done to these communities. The Sentencing Commission, however, recommended a 1-to-1 ratio, and Congress reacted by passing the statute that you heard about last week, rejecting that 1-to-1 ratio. And I agree with that, but I feel strongly that we have got to adjust the ratio, and we will continue to work to adjust it to make it fair. As we address it, I also want to make sure that the person who is distributing the powder that becomes crack gets a stiffer sentence than the person that's dealing with the crack. The second question is with respect to white-collar crime. I think you have to look at each crime on its own, in its own situation. I think clearly America is most concerned about violent crime in all its forms. But I think it is very important that we not neglect white-collar crime. It was indicated that perhaps we paid too much attention to white-collar crime. I think it is very important to do so because I think it's as bad stealing from somebody, stealing money from somebody, as it is taking it, breaking into their house, however you do it. But when you use violence, when you threaten people with physical harm, and when you harm them in the course of stealing from them, that, I think, requires an additional sentence.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, would you join with me in giving another round of applause to the Attorney General of the United States, Janet Reno. Thank you very much. Thank you.